Hello everybody, this is Jason with c2access.com. I wanted to go over and talk about a few things that I've encountered with cloud migrations and just some things to think about when it comes to migrating to the cloud, when it comes to it from a Prolaw perspective. I've been doing IT for almost 20 years now, and so I've seen a lot of these technologies evolve over the years, so I just wanted to share my 2 cents. So the first thing, the number one thing that you want to remember about a cloud solution is that it takes internet. From now on, as soon as you buy these services, you're going to be running your daily business over the internet, and that means that you don't want to have an old outdated circuit that you purchased 10 years ago that you're paying an exorbitant amount of money for what you're getting. Hopefully it's been upgraded automatically, but it's the number one thing. If you have multiple sites, you have to take in the account the internet speeds at all of those sites. Make sure that they can stay fast enough that you need them so they can work efficiently. And then the other point that I'll put out is how much bandwidth are you getting at the data center? A lot of times they have multiplexed lines that come in, and so it's nice is that we get the disaster recovery that we're really looking for from a data perspective at the data center, because they're going to have 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 different data providers, so that way if one goes down, the data center doesn't, which is great for you. I also recommend for if you're a larger office, say more than 30 attorneys, about maybe even getting a backup circuit just in case one goes down. Of course, make sure it's a different carrier, and make sure that all carriers don't terminate in the basement and it's the same line coming into the building. But if you can truly get 2 independent ISPs at your local office for larger offices, I recommend that too. And then the biggest question, and this is the one thing that I want everybody to really understand, because I think it's an important distinction, is whether or not you're going to run a private or a public cloud solution. So really, in my opinion, a private cloud solution is really just a business buying rack space and putting their own equipment in there. That being said, I have figured out some hybrid models that do work, where you can do the initial spend and own the stuff, but then outsource it immediately to the data center and have them build and everything and maintain for you. But the main difference is that if you were buying pure cloud services, there's going to be many clients. Client 1, 2, and 3 could all exist on the same physical server. What happens is they split the physical servers into something called a virtual server, which basically treats a whole server like a file. And so you can put many clients on one server, and they could all be Prolaw servers for the same 3 clients on the same server, physical server. But they don't really touch all of the IP routing and all that stuff. But technically, they do sit on the same physical space. And I think that's important for a couple reasons. The first is, if you're a plaintiff's firm and you have a really high impact visually to the public, and that server is constantly getting bombarded with requests as well as hacking attempts, that server, in my opinion, is less secure than your own private server that's only hosting your own virtual machines, because no other client is ever going to affect your processing. Now, it shouldn't, right? And on this server, it's allocated so every client gets their own stuff. But in my opinion, I don't think that's the way that the world works. And I think that I think some law firms really do want to pay another extra few dollars to get the security. And I don't think those are bad dollars spent, because ultimately we're utilizing the same technology. We're just pulling one layer of cost savings off, but we are still getting a ton of cost savings by moving to single servers that have lots of virtual machines on them. And so we can still leverage the technology, but take one step back for the sake of security. And I think for some firms, that's money well spent. All right, so keeping going. So now the next biggest question, and this really is if any law firm that's using Prolaw starts going out and getting software quotes for, hey, I'm Prolaw client, I want to be in the cloud. There's one fundamental question that you need to ask yourself before you make any type of decision. And that's whether or not you're going to exist inside of a Citrix environment, or if you're going to exist inside of a Microsoft RDP environment. I have only been running, mostly, this RDP Microsoft solution for the better part of 10, 12, 14 years. It's tried and true. Citrix, though, has been around for that exact same amount of time. In my opinion, Citrix is for if you're going to just public one aspect of your Prolaw to your professionals. So if you were not a one-office Prolaw client, but rather a front office Prolaw client that only does docketing, then I think a Citrix type solution where you're only publishing one portion of Prolaw makes sense, because the majority of your daily work processes are going to exist in other places, and you just need to touch Prolaw for these one or two little one-off things throughout the day. Published apps is a great way to do that. If you are one office, or you were trying to work towards one office, or if you were trying to work towards a more integrated office, or if you're trying to work towards the most efficient office, then I think you need to be an RDP. I will argue with anybody that wants to argue about it. There's lots of different reasons, but ultimately, when I run an RDP environment in a new Prolaw cloud solution, you're really logging into your desktop in the cloud. That means I'm not using anything locally. All I need on my local machine is antivirus and an RDP connection that's secure to the cloud, because I want all of our processing to stay in the cloud. I want it to be more secure. I want it to be more highly available. I want it to be utilizing the best technology. I want all of those things to happen. Citrix, I think, is really in the app solution more designed to work in a desktop environment where it's just touching the application every once in a while, but you're still doing the majority of your processing locally. I would move away from that model, though. I think it's more expensive to maintain, and I think just from an IT perspective, and I think ultimately you're lagging behind where the future is. And I think ultimately all PC desktops and all enterprise environments ultimately is going to exist in some type of cloud space. So this is definitely moving in that right direction. And you know, the other thing is that, and I was just talking to an attorney in Florida about this last week, is that as you invest in these technologies, especially if it's for the first time, if you're moving from a server down at the end of your hallway into a cloud environment, depending on your solution, if you have got a great IT staff, this may not be true, but usually you're going to notice that attorneys and other people are going to be able to access this information more frequently, easier, and you're going to increase your billing. Unless you're, you know, a very plaintiff-driven firm, but I just find most attorneys, if you give them the ability to work 24/7, they're going to, and that's one of the things that we're going to get with this solution. Next thing I really want to touch on, I have lived in Eastern North Carolina and Louisiana for the better part of the last 20 years, and so disaster recovery is a big thing on my list. Make sure that if your server is underneath Bob's desk down the hall, that there is some type of backup, because as we move our firms more centrally to this software, if the software is down, we can no longer work. And we're no longer make money, we can no longer bill, we can take phone calls and scribble on paper, which is, as we're moving towards a more digital model, that doesn't do us very much good. And so once we start moving to these cloud providers, we really do get a disaster recovery plan. But make sure that you ask the question. There is an additional cost usually to replicate that information. I will also say that all of the 99,999 things that they promise you don't mean anything, because most of the contracts are going to say that if we're down for 4 days, you're going to get half your money back. And half your money back for your monthly $1,000 or $4,000 or $10,000 isn't going to offset 4 days of your firm being down. So make sure that there's a disaster recovery solution in place. See if they have redundant data centers. Ask them the question, if the primary place that my data loves dies and goes down, if it got flooded, a hurricane, what would happen to my data? They should be able to give you a very quick answer. It's going to come up in Atlanta in 12 hours, or you got to pay another $1,000 for this. Just ask the question. And then it's all business stuff. It's all about, is it worth investing $5,000 a year if it ever happens, or $2,000 a year, or maybe they throw it in for free. Remember, the best time to negotiate that stuff's at the front end. AWS. So Amazon Web Services, Affinity, which is one of the vendors that I do some Prolaw consulting with, they use Amazon Web Services, and it's fast. I will say, I've seen some very large installs run very well in their environment. I'm very happy with the level of responsiveness I see out of Prolaw. The one thing that I will caution you about is that I think that there are some really outdated ideas in some data centers about what it takes to make SQL run fast. And definitely, if they start talking about putting your stuff on dedicated SQL boxes and charging you a ton of money, that would be a red flag for me. I believe that SQL is stable enough in a purely virtual environment, especially if you put it on top of a hybrid or a full-on solid state SAN. And yeah, I would be hard pressed for any data center today to buy anything other than at least some type of hybrid. So you can use Amazon Web Services. I like SQL being in local, but I think that's a little bit of old school in me, honestly. And so I think that, especially that the way that Prolaw operates, I just think that we can get fast enough speeds. The thing to be careful of is anything that's very transaction heavy. So if you have a very transaction heavy billing practice and you're billing, 1,000 clients or 2,000 matters individually a month, that's a lot of processing that you might want to think about and see, and always ask, right? See, if there's any other Prolaw clients that, are XYZ size and how long it takes them to do the functions that, take a long time, generating bills, making updates, any types of that type of stuff. So that kind of covers the SQL portion. So I don't really have any recommendations for one cloud provider over another. I think it's possible. My oldest and longest client, which we built from the ground up, they're using it's not a Prolaw approved data center, but I think they're a pretty solid data center. They had some really cool green technology that they're using in St. Louis to transfer heat. And honestly, most data centers and cloud providers are only reactive. So don't expect them to make Prolaw be the best thing ever. Expect them to keep the lights on and the water going. If you want to make sure that Prolaw is running quickly and efficiently and doing all of the, operating at like the absolute peak, that's when you call somebody like me your Prolaw support. Because you really need somebody that understands the application and how it works to optimize it in the environment. And I haven't seen that type of dedication in any of the current Prolaw providers. I've seen very competent admins, but nobody that's truly a Prolaw admin or guru that understands how all the pieces work and why they've designed it the way they've done. They just kind of put it inside of a normal data center model, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I just want to make sure that you know that, especially if you have some ideas about dumping all of your IT staff and just putting it into cloud services. I don't think that's smart. I think that desktop services are always very important. Hopefully you're not paying too much for those. But at the same time, we want to make sure that people who are billing $150 to $500 an hour aren't sitting around because we don't have an IT person. And I will say that even though I think that Prolaw has come a long way, it still needs some level of admin oversight to make sure that it stays running optimally. And you want to make sure that the whole system isn't starting to lag and creating inefficiency across the organization. So, a few things to think about. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Jason, 504-517-2620 or jason@c2access.com. Thanks for your time, y'all. Good luck.